Welcome to the Embracing Grace podcast. I'm your host, Cindy Nicholson. Always remember, you are loved, chosen, and redeemed. Hello and welcome, everybody. This is the Embracing Grace podcast, and I just want to welcome you to another episode. I am so honored and so privileged to have somebody on my podcast who I've been binge watching on YouTube for a little while. Joseph, welcome. Welcome to the podcast and welcome to the broadcast. I just know that everybody's in for an intimate time with the Lord tonight.
Cindy, thank you. Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here and praying that this will be helpful for whoever watches.
Thank you so much. So do you want to just tell us a little bit more about who Joseph is?
So I'm 38 years old, currently living in Auckland, New Zealand, happily married for the last 13 years. We have three beautiful girls, 8, 6, and 4. And life is full. Currently, I am coaching people into their God assignments, helping them make sense of what God looks like in the spheres of influence that He's opened up for them. And also helping these small groups that will run on their own without a brand, without one leader, without an anointing. What does it look like to be an ecclesia? We've begun small groups up and down New Zealand and now probably around the world. So these are my two main focuses: discipleship and then kingdom purpose. Yeah.
You also call yourself a mobilizer on your website. What does that mean?
So 2008, I got radically saved and I'm all in. I said to the Lord, I'm giving you 30 days. If you are real, show me. And if you do, then you can have my life. And in those 30 days, somewhere the love of the Father wrecked me to a point where I went from one side to another, total an extremist, if you want to call it. And I freaked everyone out. But this journey began of, okay, Papa, if you're so real, what are we doing? Why are we here? And since then, I'd been in many roles in the church system, and then I kind of came out of the typical church system. But one of the things that was consistent was this mobilizing element. Like, we're not just here to sit down and talk about stuff. There are things to experience. There are things to explore. There are things to engage. There is a practical outworking of this kingdom. And so as I looked at Jesus's life, there was always movement. There was always something happening. He didn't just sit down and preach and go home and relax. There was always the kingdom expanding. And so in 2020 and between the pandemic and all this kind of stuff, I felt the Lord really commissioned me with that word. I'm calling you to mobilize my body, And so that's why I use that word, mobilizer. We don't just talk about it, we do something about it. We are all about the being, but the way I know you are being who you are is that there will be a doing that will follow that. So yeah.
I want to just give honor where honor's due to Samantha, who introduced me to you, because hi, Samantha. I want to, that's something that she keeps on saying to me, is that when she introduced me to you, she said, this guy is all about doing. He's not about sitting back. And we've both discussed it where we said, we feel like we've been called to people who need to run. We're not called to people who are going to just want to hear the message and hear the message and hear the message, but not do anything about it. So I can totally relate to that.
Yeah. Shout out to Samantha. She's a powerhouse.
Absolutely.
And,
She
yeah,
is.
cool.
She is. I just love her so much. Yeah. So she shared something with me. I mean, she was the one who introduced me to your ministry, and she shared a video called a video teaching series called Sparrows and Lies. And when you say this wrecked, God wrecked you that season, that's what I felt like. I felt like my life was turned upside down because I feel like, I mean, I joke about this. I say I was born saved because I've only ever known Jesus. I don't know a life without him. And I've walked away from him, but I've always known that he's there. So grew up in church, learned all about him, studied ministry, all of that. But hearing your message, I was like, why have I not learned this like 20 years ago? when I was studying
Mm.
ministry. And I
Mhm.
feel at the moment, I feel like um, I've got a big brother, and it was always difficult to get into his circles. He's 5 years older than I am. And now
Mm.
I feel like a little sister who's in the big brother's playpen going, I need to learn, I need to learn. So, Sparrows and
Mm.
Lilies, where did that come from?
Yeah, so my first 5, 6 years was a typical charismatic Pentecostal kind of church experience. We're
Mm,
going hard. I am moving in the gifts. The church I was at, powerful presence, power-based church, and lots of amazing transformation happening. But in that pattern, I saw so many believers always talking about the challenge of finances or being broke. And I'd have people message me asking if I'd fund their missions trips and stuff. And I was always like, Lord, why don't we have money? Why are Christians broke? What's the deal? What are we not understanding? And since about 2012, 13, as God took me on this kingdom journey, understanding the kingdom, the subject of wealth came up, the subject of money came up, and we have so many weird beliefs around money
mm,
from our upbringings and from church, from religion. A lot of people will say money is evil, even though the Bible doesn't say that. The Bible talks about the love of money being evil. And most people think that that means I sit down and I fantasize about money.
mm,
But in reality, the world system has actually taught us to love money because we work 40 to 50 hours for this money. It's taught us to shape our whole life around
mm,
how money is going to come to us. And so
mm,
there are actually a lot of people that love money and have no idea that they do. They actually base their whole life on money, but would
mm,
profess that they don't love money, but actually money is ruling their life. So
mm,
I believe that there are three things that were created to be our servants, but have become our master, and that's time, money, and feelings. And
mm.
so when I say
Sure.
money, it could be resources, it could be anything like that, not just physical money, but property, wealth, it was created to
Yeah.
serve us, was created to serve a purpose. But for most people, their money and their wealth owns them now. It dictates their decisions. There are a lot of people who would say, I can't follow my purpose, what God's calling me to, because I don't have the resources. All of this is proof. Financial freedom is another lie that's perpetuated all the time. That if you have enough money in your bank account, you're financially free, then you have
Yeah.
options. But my Bible says that whom the Son sets free is free indeed. And we must decide whether he set us free or money is going to set us free. So
Mm,
in that training, I talk a lot about mammon because that was my journey. So in 2010, I get married, and I'm a single guy with a job. My wife was single with a job, and now both our incomes combined. We have this powerful money surge and we're having a great time. And then about a year and a half in, we go to India, we come back from a holiday, and the gym that she's working at goes bankrupt. The sales job I have, the sales dry up. And suddenly it was like a 2 year period of how are we going to survive? And at that
mm,
time, my understanding, because of all the teaching that I had heard, was God is testing you. And if you prove
mm,
yourself faithful, you'll get a blessing. So it became all about my performance at the beginning. And I'm like, okay, well, now I'm scared. How do I do this? What's going on, Lord? And it wasn't for about 3 to 4, maybe 5 years later, I realized what he was doing was detaching me from the system of mammon. So a lot of
mm,
times when people go through financial, what looks like hardship, it's actually God removing all your trust, all your faith, all your wiring that had been trained to look to mammon as source, removing it from there, and then now putting it into his kingdom. And that's
mm,
what happened for me. And so then I began this journey of maturing as a son in
mm,
finances, in wealth, understanding also.
mm,
So there was a pivotal moment for me because when all this was happening, I was like, Lord, like I've given you my life. My bank account's
mm,
not reflecting that right now. Me
mm,
and my wife are like, I don't know how this year is going to go. And during that time, there was a moment where it's like I died to this whole subject and I died to what I knew. And
mm,
people talk about death to self, but a lot of times we don't understand what that means, like dying to what you know. Death to
mm,
self is dying to all my previous understanding, all my faith, all my trust, whatever I put things in, I died to all of that. And there was a moment like that for me. So I love my pastor, my first pastor. Without him, I don't think I'd be following the Lord like I do.
Mm.
And I listened to two of his sermons that were on a CD back then, on a CD in my car. I
Mm.
listened to them maybe 30 to 40 times each on
Mm.
repeat, right? It was like I have it memorized in my head even now,
Yeah.
parts of the sermons. But he did a sermon called God is Faithful. And while that was going on, I was stuck in traffic and I'm weeping in the car. I pull over at this Burger King, which is a fast food chain here. And I get out in the car park and I have this death moment. You know, I'm outside,
Mm.
hands up, crying in this car park. People are walking past me. I can hear them, but I don't care. Like something was happening there. Like old Joseph was dying, his old understanding.
Sure.
And so as I began this, like, okay, Lord, well, you teach me. If I'm in your kingdom and you own everything, what are we doing? And
Mm.
Sparrows and Lilies was my journey through Matthew chapter 6, the beginning of it
Mm.
all, the word provision. And so from
Mm.
there, God started talking to me about provision, overflow, abundance, these three different phases and how you move through them in your maturity. And
Mm.
when you look at even Jesus's life, you will see these three phases, right? From 0 to 12, he's in the phase or the realm of provision.
Mm.
He's living off his parents. He's probably
Mm.
getting pocket money. From 12 to 30, he's learning business. He's learning how to write invoices. He's learning how money works. He's coming into overflow. But from 30 onwards, he lived in a different realm. He's able to pull a
Mm.
coin out of a fish. He's able to multiply resources. He's living from another dimension. And so
Mm.
Sparrows and Lilies, I'm sorry that this is a long answer, but
No, no, not at all.
that that's how it began. And it's the first of three things, right? There will be an overflow series and then there will be an abundance series.
Mm.
And yeah.
Yeah, we're
Mm.
waiting for that. Um,
Yeah. So one of the reasons that I think Sparrows and Lilies has carried what it has in terms of a frequency or an anointing is because that's my journey and it's not
mm.
theory.
Yes.
I've walked through that. And now I am learning what overflow looks like and the purpose of overflow. And so I'm in no rush to release stuff. Like, even though I have theoretically knowledge of it, even of abundance, I think
Mm.
because I'm not in that phase at the moment, and I can happily say that. So in the world, right, provision and overflow and abundance look like a hierarchy. It
Mm.
looks like, oh, you got to make your way from provision to overflow to abundance, because the world is always trying to make you chase something. It's always trying to make
Yeah.
you try and achieve something. But in
Mm.
the kingdom, it's just a bridge of maturity. Just
Sure.
like one day I was 10 years old, then I became 20, then I became 30. I couldn't fast track it and make it happen when I wanted. I just became it in
Mm.
time. Provision, overflow, and abundance are the same thing. Like as you mature into it. You mature into
Mm.
new realms of understanding the ecosystem of heaven. And there's
Mm.
no rush. You enjoy the journey. Like when I'm 5, I enjoy being 5. I'm not crying
Yeah.
that I'm not 40. I enjoy that I can wake up in
Yeah.
the morning and my biggest concern is which toys I'm going to play with, and
Mm.
it's totally fine. And
Yeah.
that's what makes this beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. And absolutely love the journey that you take us through in Sparrows and Lilies, because when you start out with the Israelites leaving Egypt, and it's this mindset that we need to leave behind,
Mm,
the slavery mentality that we're stuck in, and I mean, I wrote it down earlier when you were talking, is like, I used to say when I was working full time, I used to say, I feel like I'm loyal to my own hurt. This thing
mm,
that's hurting me so much, why can I not let go? Why can I not walk away from this? Because I mean, I didn't understand it then. And
mm.
a part of me maybe I've received little bits of revelation over the last couple of years, but nothing like Sparrows and Lilies has opened it up. And what is that journey of crossing over? I mean, what are the things that we need to look out for and understand? What is God saying when you speak about Deuteronomy 11? Because I've been reading that and I'm like, whoa, there's so much in
Yeah.
there alone. We could talk about that.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the journey that the Israelites had to take, it began with a solid demonstration of
Mm.
I am who I am, and I love you people. I have chosen you, and I'm about to show you what I can do and where I want to take you. And so these plagues happen, and this showdown happens with Pharaoh, and God is demonstrating without a doubt, without a shadow of a doubt, that He is capable of doing anything and everything. And these people get a chance to see that, kind of like when we get saved. Salvation
mm,
is usually a response to our revelation of who God is and what he can do. And it's like this,
mm,
okay, I'm taking you out of Egypt moment,
mm,
And but what happens with these Israelites is what happens to most of us. They come out of there. Okay, can you imagine this, right? We see 10 plagues, we see all the stuff going on, and then we walk through the sea, and there's
mm.
walls of water on either side, and millions of us walk through, and then the sea falls, and we're seeing God move in these amazing ways, only to then cry, "Did you bring us here to die? Let me go back to Egypt. Like, I'll go back to
Yeah.
the worst place, which is such an insult. Like, we all think that, oh, I can't believe they did that, but we do that all the time without
Mm,
realizing, in our
yeah.
hearts. And that's something I want to touch on quickly is that God hears your heart. Your mouth may never say what your heart is saying every
Wow.
day, but God's already heard it. And when you learn to be real with God, because He is so loving, right? And love is patient. He is so patient with us that when you learn to be real with God, you actually begin accelerating in a way that you can never by trying to pretend to be where you're not. For
Mm,
example, if you are disappointed at a business decision, if you're disappointed at something that happened in your childhood, if you are discouraged and broken about some of your experiences, and now you have God and you sing, "You're a good, good father," but in your heart, you have brokenness about certain
sure.
things that have happened in your life,
Wow.
and you never talk to Him about it. What's happening is that there is actually a discrepancy in your frequencies. It's not congruent. So your heart is saying one thing, your mouth is saying another thing. And one of the prophets talks about how they praise me with their lips, but their heart is
Yeah.
far from me.
Sure.
And most people are in that place because it's almost better for you to say the bad stuff because it's going to line up with your lips and it gives God a chance to meet you where you're at than
Yeah.
you pretending you are somewhere where you're not and trying to build a relationship of a lie. And God doesn't
Mm,
build relationship of lies, right? That's
mm,
why so many stories we hear of big transformation is like a drug dealer or an ex-prostitute or someone who's totally
mm,
broken. In their brokenness, their heart and their mouth, they're just willing to say what it is. And I
mm,
think a lot of Christianity has trained us to not say what it is. It's trained us to say the right thing. So we have what it is down here. We have the right thing over here. It's really hard to build a relationship that's not based on truth,
sure.
transparency, vulnerability. It's based on performance and
Mm,
pretending to be something. And God will never pretend with you. He will never pretend with me.
mm,
So sorry, a little bunny trail there. I think that's for someone there.
yeah.
Because I've worked with people that have had deep hurt and have never expressed it to God. And then they say, well, He already knows it. So why should I say it? Because that's how you build
Sure.
relationship.
Mm,
There are things that I knew about my wife, but when she started talking to me about it, our union went to a new place. I
mm,
didn't want to just jump into that space and have an opinion of it. When she allowed me in to some of what she went through, that caused our intimacy to go to a place it couldn't go just by me knowing what happened.
mm,
And so God truly desires a relationship with us, not just to fix our problems, not just to be a genie or be some kind of vending machine. He wants to
mm,
do life with us. That's what we were
mm,
made for. If we go back to
mm,
Genesis 1, we see how He made creation. He makes Adam and then Eve, and He walked with them in the cool of the day. They had no
mm,
demons to slay. They had nothing to reverse. They had no problems. It was pure bliss. And in the
mm,
bliss, His desire was, we will walk in the cool of the day
mm,
and let us make this place like heaven, you
yeah.
know? So coming back to this Israelites journey, they find themselves wanting to go back to the slavery, and most people don't realize that in the wilderness, in the place of nothing, in the place of fear, of the fear of the unknown, the fear of the future, the fear of circumstances, you get a chance to get to know God in a way you can't know Him anywhere else.
Mm,
Right. So we take that wilderness place. There is a way that you may know God in Egypt, in the slavery system. Right. There is a way that you may know God in Canaan, in the promised land. But
mm,
the way you will know Him in the wilderness, you can't know Him in these places. And
mm,
that I believe is a very important part of the journey. And most people, they get into a wilderness of sorts, then they run back. Then they get into a
Mm,
wilderness of sorts, and then they run back. Very
mm,
few choose to cross the Jordan. And Jordan actually means death. Very
mm,
few choose to cross the death to everything I've known, everything I have been, to now move into my promised land.
mm.
Mm.
Oh, I wanted to discuss like that fear aspect of it. I mean, there's various levels of fear and various understandings of fear. And I know somebody who's really, I don't want to call it fearful, but nervous of getting excited. When we talk
Mm.
about God's abundance, nervous
Mm.
of getting excited so that they don't become disappointed if it doesn't happen. And I'm like, but where's the faith in living like that? Right?
Yeah.
But because of the level of disappointment that they've experienced in life, it's very hard for them to overcome that.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
So this is going back to what I just touched on, right? Like the level
Mm,
of disappointment that they've had in their life, that I've had in my life.
mm,
It's not wrong to have disappointment. It's not wrong to have discouragement. It's not wrong to have seasons of feeling a bit lost. But what do you do in that time? And sadly,
yeah.
most people, they package their disappointment, they make it look beautiful, and they put it on a mantelpiece for the rest of their life. But in
Mm,
reality, if that disappointment drives you to have conversation with the Lord, when you're done, there is no disappointment anymore. He doesn't take you into disappointment and
mm,
bring you out with that disappointment,
yeah.
right? That disappointment then becomes some kind of an appointing for you in the future. So when
Mm,
I meet people who have been disappointed for years and they've never expressed that to the Lord, they've never walked through that with the Lord. What they're saying is, I just want you to fix my problem. I don't really want you. I don't really want
yes.
to know you,
Sure.
Lord. Like, I'm happy for you. Solve this problem for me. We'll carry on. And I'm happy with maybe a transactional relationship. Like, I do this for you, you do that for me, and that's our basis. Like, we don't need to have a
Mm,
heart to heart.
sure.
And so the fear conversation, it comes up like, oh, well, I don't want to get my hopes up because what if it doesn't work out? The reason you think, what if it doesn't work out, is because you don't know him. The reason you don't know
Mm,
him is because you won't process your disappointment with him. The reason you
mm,
won't process your disappointment with him is because you're afraid that he might not be
mm,
a good father. And
mm,
in that moment, being vulnerable to say, God, I don't know if you're a good father. Now, that takes a lot of humility, especially when people have been walking a certain way for 30 years, 20 years, to have the humility to say,
sure.
actually, I don't
Yeah.
know you like that. I know
Mm,
of you, but I don't know you like that. If they're willing to be that humble, then this suddenly opens the door for God to walk through that disappointment with them so that it will never remain. And that
mm,
begins that journey. I think that sadly, religion has tried to train us to do out of duty, to do out of performance that God intended us to walk into out of intimacy.
yeah.
Everything that God designed for us to walk in from intimacy, religion has tried to make us perform and do it as duty. And
Mm,
that's where a problem lies. So, for example, people talk about wanting to slay Goliath, right? I want to kill
mm,
my Goliath. I want to do this big thing with the Lord. But they haven't ever killed a bear. They haven't ever killed a lion. They never
mm,
even looked after the sheep,
mm.
right? If we look at David's story, they didn't do all these other things. So
Yeah.
there is no track record. How are you expecting this extreme faith when you have no track record?
Mm,
Jesus himself at 30 began all this stuff, but what was he doing for 30 years? There
mm,
was a building brick upon brick of a track record to when he said something, there was no doubt. There was no, is this going to happen? Can it happen? So we
mm,
like to look at faith as this abstract construct. It's somewhere out
mm,
there and we gotta learn to have it. But I'd like to propose to you, like Galatians says, faith works through love. That when
mm,
your love relationship with God deepens, faith is a byproduct. It
mm,
is the fruit, right? It is a fruit of the spirit. It's not
mm.
something you strain for. It is something that just happens when you
Yeah.
understand the love. And I give this example a lot. Like my children have supreme faith in me and my wife, and they're 8 years old, 6 years old, 4 years old, but they have supreme faith, and we
Mm,
never sat them down to give them a faith lesson.
yeah.
They never were taught 12 steps to faith. This is how you must trust your mama and papa. They've just done life with us. And so
Yeah.
far, we have not let them down. And because we
Mm,
don't let them down, they know they can trust us. And it's
mm,
the same with the Lord. As you journey with him, you see him proving himself over and over again, where faith just becomes a byproduct. It's not something you're working to attain. It's something that
mm,
just shows up out of your intimacy, you know?
mm. Does that fear of mammon, and this is what I experienced, is I never want I wanted the abundant life, right?
Mm,
Because I know
mm,
that that is what God promised me. But I was so fearful of not wanting to serve mammon that I think I blocked it in a way. And I mean, that's just a
mm,
tactic of the enemy. I mean, I recognize it now. Like, he actually used himself
mm,
as a way of blocking what God was trying to give me. Does that
mm.
is that the same thing?
So fear is really interesting, right? Because whenever you are making decisions out of fear or living in fear, you're not living in who you were supposed to be, who you
Mm,
were created to be. So in Genesis 1, we see the God's design. We see the idea God had when he made man. He said, be fruitful, multiply, subdue. So that's your do, and then have
mm,
dominion. So there's a be, do, have. We
yeah,
were created for this. Every being, every human being was created for the be, do, have paradigm, you know?
yeah,
So that means that abundance is not something you do and have, it's actually who you are. And
yes,
every time you are in fear, you can't have fear and abundance at the same time,
mm,
right? Because usually with that, the opposite of abundance is lack, right? The
mm,
opposite of abundance is the fear of not enough.
mm,
So no matter how much people try and do abundance to have abundance, if they are in fear, they can't
yes,
shift
sure,
that. And so when the Lord comes in this picture, the first thing he's doing is shifting your being.
yeah,
And the first thing that has to happen is all fear's got to go, honey. Because how are we
mm,
going to have fear in the being and then no fear in the doing? It's not
mm,
possible. So when I meet people that, oh, I have a fear of man, I have a fear of writing a book, I have a fear of being who I'm supposed to be. So the doing has so much fear. It's usually
yeah,
because the being has so much fear. And so mammon can't really stop anybody. It can't stop,
mm,
it doesn't have that kind of authority, right?
mm,
But by using things like fear, we stop ourselves.
yes,
And that's the only thing the enemy can do is get us in agreement with him.
mm,
He can't
mm,
actually physically just stop us, right?
yeah,
In most cases, the only thing the enemy can do is go, how do I get Cindy to agree with me?
mm,
Okay, she's obviously not going to agree with an aggressive approach. Maybe I can twist some doctrine and
mm,
twist the heart of her father in her mind so that then she will sit down, you know.
mm,
Mm.
mm. Yeah, that's really good. Um, Something I need to meditate on a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
so a prayer that I have encouraged everyone to pray, and these are dangerous prayers, by the way. If you're going to pray
oh, I've
them,
been
he's going
I've
to
been
answer
praying
them.
them.
Father, I give you full
Full
permission.
permission.
Dot,
Amen.
dot, 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 dot. Fill in the blank, you know. I meet people that are like, I wish I read the Bible more. I wish I prayed more. I wish I went deeper with the Lord. Well, here's the craziest part of this whole thing, right? You can't love anybody until you realize that he loved you first. So you don't even have
Yeah.
the ability to love anybody. You don't have the ability to conjure up your own breath. He gave you
Mm,
breath.
mm,
He gave you life. So there is nothing in here in this experience that began with you.
yes.
You are a part of something that began by your good
Yeah.
father long before you ever even understood anything. So if we can understand that, um, and then we come into this, Father, I give you full permission type of prayers. I've prayed things like, Father, I give you full permission to make me the man you want me to be. Father, I
Mm,
give you full permission to train me in understanding the word. I want to get revelation. I don't just want to read this book like
mm,
text. Father, I give you full permission to make me a guy that prays more, to make me a good husband, to make me a
mm,
father. And then begins this journey, right? And so there's the being, and then there's the doing, and then you end up having. And
mm,
so there's so many examples I have of when I've prayed these prayers. Like before I got married, I was very nervous. I had never had a good relationship with a woman that wasn't purely physical and operational, right? Because as I got saved and I started to understand the depth of intimacy importance of communication, vulnerability, transparency. I started to understand what happens between me and God, and how between a husband and wife, there's that same union
Mm.
and intimacy. I could see very clearly that I didn't have what
Mm.
it takes to have a good marriage. And so as soon as the marriage subject began for me, straight away, I was like, Lord, I need you to help me. I give you full permission to make me the man I need to be for this marriage to be blessed.
Mm.
And somewhere along the line, communication was something that he just trained me in. Today, I
Mm.
get paid for communication. I'm
Mm.
reaping the benefit of communication. But 15 years ago, this was not a thing that was so good for me.
Mm.
So, Father, I give you full permission to accelerate me. And so now Cindy might go through this process in 7 days that someone else might
Mm.
go through in 6 years,
So,
because she
yeah.
gave him full permission.
Mm.
She gave him full. And then so when he gave her simple instruction, she just walked it out,
Yeah.
and she walked it out and saw the consequence. Some
Mm.
people don't realize there is a consequence for obedience, and there is a consequence for disobedience. And it's
Mm.
really hard because people go, well, if he's a good father, why would he do that? My children learn consequences. There is a
Yeah.
consequence for rebellion. There is a consequence for when my children act outside of their original intent, when my
Yes.
children don't follow the ethics, the code of our home, of the
Mm.
Wilson household. Just like that, there
Mm.
is a consequence when you don't follow the ethics and the code of the kingdom. There is a
Mm.
consequence when you don't follow the laws of the realms you're in. Like, no matter how
Mm.
much you don't believe in gravity, there will be a consequence if you jump off a
Yeah.
building, right?
Mm.
99.9% of the time. Something's going to happen. So
Yeah.
understanding that, oh, if there's a consequence for disobedience, or if there is a consequence for being out of alignment, then there is a really good consequence for obedience. There's a really good consequence for being in alignment. And I've
Yeah.
watched a lot of believers
Sure.
face
Mm.
unnecessary pain. They've paid prices that they didn't want to pay, end up in places they never wanted to be, just because they were out of alignment or didn't consider the consequence.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you say there's a consequence for obedience. I don't think we ever think of it that way. You
Yeah.
know that you're being obedient, but you're never expectant of like the good things that are going to come because you're obedient.
Because
You're
we've been
expectant
trained.
of the negative side, the disobedience,
Yeah.
because you know that they're and training is exactly the right word. We've been trained to expect the bad, but we're not as expectant on the results of obedience.
Yeah. But so the Bible makes it very clear, right? That God,
Yes,
he rewards those who diligently seek him. And
yes,
Jesus constantly
sure.
gives these examples. There is a reward for your actions. There is a good consequence for your actions. It's interesting when he's on the cross, all the disciples run. There's only one left, and that's John. And
Mm.
interestingly enough, John is like the disciple of love. He likes to write that he's the
Mm.
disciple who Jesus loved,
Love,
which I
yeah.
find very interesting. And I think that there's a mystery in there that John was able to receive a type of love from Jesus that maybe the others struggled to receive. And so John, he was like, my connection to my rabbi is a love one. It's
Sure.
not a knowledge one. It's not a practical outworking. It's a love one. So when it
Mm.
comes time to the cross, the love guy is the only guy there, because
Mm.
now theology is out the window. Transactions are out the window because your rabbi is on a cross. He can't give you anything. He can't do anything for you. But the only guy that's there when it matters is the love guy. And then there is a consequence we see where Jesus looks at Mary and he's like,
Mm.
hey, mom, like, here is your son. Son, here is your mom. And the Bible says that very moment that John that day took Mary home to be his mom. There
Mm.
is a consequence. There is a consequence when you want to give your 2 fish and your 5 loaves, that you end up with 12 basketful later. There is a
Mm.
consequence when you are asked, what do you want? And you say, I want my eyes to be healed. And then you get healed, right? We see
Mm.
all this with Jesus, right? There's a
Sure.
consequence
Mm.
when you take your 5 talents and you turn it into a 2. You get more
Mm.
talents. There is a consequence when you take your 1 talent and bury it into the ground. What you have is
Yeah.
taken away from you,
Yeah.
you know? So there is a
And that's always the
consequence when you,
focus.
yeah,
That's
because
that's the only thing you
all
focus on.
Christianity has trained us in is behavior modification. There is an angry God, do the right thing, and escape the punishment. Escape the punishment, brother. That's all this is. There is no reward. There's no upside. We just need
Yeah.
to escape the downside, Just don't go to hell. Just receive the salvation because you don't want to go to hell, and do the right thing, and don't do this and don't do that and don't do. That's all we've been trained in, and
Mm.
it's a hard wiring.
Mm.
And so it's really hard to have hope that then leads to faith that expects good things when
Mm.
that's all we've been trained in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
I want to talk a little bit about the training, and you speak about this, and you've got the most beautiful journey that you take us through on Sparrows and Lilies, in terms of being a baby in the house of a bus driver, then an accountant, and then in the president, I think you said, and then in the king's household. And I mean, for us living I'm originally South African, but living in the UK, I can now, as when you were teaching it, I could then relate to it to, for example, the king and the royal
Mm.
household here in the UK. Take us through that journey, because there is training ground that we need to go
Mm.
through as sons and daughters of God.
Yeah, so and this what I'm about to say is prevalent in the world, right? So Romans 12:2, it says, "Don't be conformed to the pattern of this world." So
Mm.
there is a pattern in this world, and that pattern is designed to make you learn so that you will know, and then you may behave, right? You try and act it out. Learn to know to try and act it out. And that pattern causes people to chase knowledge, right? And when you go into the word knowledge, you go into Gnosticism. It's like knowledge becomes your God. So there are
Mm.
actually a lot of Christians, their God is actually the knowledge of God. It's not God.
Mm.
They don't have a
Mm.
living relationship with a living God. They have a way they behave because they learned, and now their knowledge is ruling their behavior. And that's the
Mm.
pattern of this world. You go to university and you have a business professor who will teach you about business. So you know knowledge. Now you got to act like a businessman. How does a business lecturer sit there and train everybody on business and he's never run a business?
Mm.
How do we allow that? Like, you have
Yeah.
never run a business, yet I
Yeah.
am going to pay thousands of dollars to be in this university to learn from you how business works. But that's the pattern of this world, and that's the pattern of Christianity. I read the
Mm.
Bible, I have some stories, so I've learned, I know because I went to seminary, and now I'm going to stand here every Sunday and teach you how to behave,
Mm.
right? And so all we transfer is knowledge. But when
Yeah.
I see Jesus's life, when I see the kingdom, it is so practical. In the kingdom, you're not learning to know to behave. You are training to appropriate to become.
Yes.
You become it. You don't
Mm.
learn something just to know it as a theory and regurgitate it. You become it. And when you become
Mm.
something, you have tons of stories. It's
Mm.
your life. Like, I don't care if anyone believes what I believe. Like,
Mm.
evangelism in the way Christianity has taught us, because I learned to know to behave. When I go to evangelize, I'm trying to convince somebody. And if
Mm.
they believe me or not, that's why I have fear of man, because I'm half unsure of my own product, if you want to call it, right?
Mm.
But when you're trained to become, I
Yes.
don't care if anyone believes it. This is my life,
Yeah.
and I'll give you 1,000 stories about it.
Mm.
So that's the part where I think that so much of Christianity has not focused on what's happening in the real training. And I hope this is
Mm.
okay. I'm going here, right? But
Go
in
ahead.
most church services, right, you get taught really good stuff, but you get trained in rubbish. And I'll
Yeah.
explain this to you. Okay. So you go to a church service from when you were a child, you were trained. Now you're taught God is awesome. You got to follow God, taught from the scripture. Great. But what are you trained in? You walk in the building, go find a seat. Why am I sitting? You're going to sit and you're going to watch these people. Oh, what
Mm.
am I watching? Oh, they are chosen by God. So what am I? Well, you're chosen to sit on the seat. And what they're doing is a bit more important. Oh, okay. They have a deeper connection with God. These are things you're trained in. No one
Mm.
will come and tell you this, but the training, right,
Mm.
is the most important element, because in
Sure.
life, we will
Yes.
always revert to the training we have had,
Yeah.
not to the learning, especially when there's chaos in somebody's life. They will revert to the training. Like, if I
Mm.
run into a church now with weapons and a bomb and machine gun, most people are going to and fall on the floor. Now, if there's someone in there who's been trained to be a Marine, he's going to take me out. And in
Yeah.
the midst of the chaos, He knows what to do because we always come back to our level of training. Most believers struggle through COVID, struggle through things because there's no training. There's only learning. Hear more sermons, hear more sermons. So
Yes.
we've not paid enough attention to how we are training people.
Yeah.
So as a coach, yep, I share information. Yes, I share stuff, but there's always worksheets. There's always homework. There's always, what are we going to do about this? And I'm going to check up. Like, there's accountability. That's the training. The training is, I learned something. I learned how to use it. I have a story to tell you. And I
Mm.
believe that's the gospel. Jesus grabs these disciples and he goes on that journey. It's a training journey. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of times when Jesus even confronts the disciples, it's after they do something.
Yeah.
It's not before they do something as a theory, you know? So he's like, okay, let's go. We're going to cast out demons. He sends them all. They come back and they're like, wow, even the demons are scared of us. Then he brings a correction. But now they know it in a way they could never know just from learning, you know?
Mm.
And that's the part where without training, there is nothing. But we are all being trained 24/7. You're being trained at your
Mm.
work. You were trained in your home, right? The Bible says, train your child in a way they should go, and they won't depart from it. Most parents
Yeah.
try and teach their child one thing, but they train them in another thing and then wonder why their children departed. Well, your
Yes.
child did not depart. They went the way you trained them. Now, you think you
Mm.
taught them something
Mm.
good. So you're wondering why they're not doing what you taught them, but they went the way you trained them. And so training is something that we all live by. And
Mm.
learning how to allow yourself to be trained is a very important element because it takes a lot of humility, right?
Mm.
Allowing yourself to be trained. So back in the day when they'd have a rabbi, there were three things they wanted from their rabbi. They wanted to know what their rabbi knew. They wanted to do what the rabbi did, but they also wanted to be who the rabbi was. And
Mm.
so these students would give their whole life to follow a rabbi everywhere he went. They would
Mm.
walk behind it. They would learn his ways to know what he knew, do what he did, but then be who he was. And a lot
Mm.
of Christianity, many people settle to know what God knows by reading the word. And then we
Yeah.
got charismatic Pentecostal. They want to get into, let's do what he did.
Yes.
But very few want to go into, I'm going to die and now be who he was, you know?
Mm. And ultimately,
So,
that's what it is, right? I mean, if we are, I mean, there's a scripture which says that we've been called as ambassadors. And if you look at
mm,
what an ambassador is, it's a direct reflection of the country that you are from, that you're
yep,
representing. You cannot speak
yes,
opposite to what the country or the president or the king or whoever has spoken. You have to be
yep,
in complete alignment. And in the same way, when God has made us in his image and his likeness, it's like standing in a mirror. There is a direct reflection of who Jesus was, and
mm,
ultimately, then the word. We have to
mm,
be a direct reflection of that. And I get when you spoke about training, what I wrote down was that training for our own intimacy with God. We're
mm,
going to church to learn and possibly to do, but we never learn to be intimate with God for ourselves and to
mm,
hear from God ourselves. And therefore that whole, I mean, you were talking about the other day, you mentioned that you teach leaders, you call them parents instead
mm,
of leaders. And I found that to be so, like, my heart was just like skipped a beat in a way,
mm,
because I was like, wow,
mm,
that is what we've missed. We've missed actually that intimate training on how to relate to the Father.
mm. Well, because the system breeds so
Mm.
much knowledge, learning, knowing, and then behave that way.
Yeah.
How can I teach you what I don't have? You know,
Mm.
I can't teach you
For
what
sure.
I don't have. I can only teach you what I know or what I live. And that's that perpetual thing that's going on. I
Yes.
just want to address a couple of things. So when when you say, uh, as an ambassador, we have to reflect. We have to reflect Jesus. We have to reflect the word. One of the things that I found very powerful is shifting that understanding or the narrative to actually, I don't have to do, because I don't have to do anything, right? You don't have to do anything.
For sure.
No one's coming with a knife, right?
Mm.
But if I realize that actually being like Jesus is actually who I was created to be, it's
Mm.
not something I have to try and become. That's the original intent. That
Sure.
was my
Yeah.
design the whole time, right? Romans
Yeah.
8:29. I was predestined to be conformed to that
Mm.
image, that likeness. That's me. So whenever
Yeah.
I'm acting outside of that, that's not me. And
Yeah.
most people are running around being a version that this world has taught them. But if they were being who they really are, they would be just like him, you know. That's
Yeah.
actually who you are. So even the ease of that, I've found a lot of people, it just eases them into starting to walk as Jesus did. It's not something they have to try and do. It's actually who they are at their core, and they're allowing the Lord to pull that out through them, you know.
Mm. Mm.
Mm.
I know
So
we've got about.
when we talk about,
Mm.
sorry,
No,
I'll
you
just say
go
one
ahead.
last thing. So when you talk about um, intimacy with the Lord and learning to develop our own intimacy, like I look at the church as if there's leaders in the church, they are responsible for the people. Hebrews 13:17 says that. That means, now, are you responsible for the outcome of all the people in your church? No, of course not. They have free will, they have choice. Right? But you are responsible for whether you laid out the best pathway for them.
Yes.
And if you ask most church leaders and you talk about this, they're not going to say every Sunday getting up here, one person talking to 1,000 is the best way to see real results in people's lives. It's no one's going to ever accept that. Right? Just
Mm.
hearing is not enough. Everybody knows that already. So I think that the responsibility is on the leader, on the parent to go, how am I creating the best case scenario for my kids? How
Mm.
am I creating something that will cause my kids to flourish? Which is a
Mm.
question most people don't ask, even in church leadership. Because in reality, for me to create a scenario that makes my kids flourish, it costs me. Like just
Mm.
like you would know with your husband, when you have children, you start your whole life revolves around the kids, not around you. It's not
Mm.
just around what you want to do. All your decisions are now affected by this little 24-year-old with your heart running around the house, you know? And she's getting to dictate what you do with your money, what you do with your time. She has a very big influence, and that's costly. Only
Mm.
true love will allow that to happen. And so we
Mm.
do that in the home, but in the church, I don't think we've taken enough responsibility to go, are we creating a place where people can train? Or do we just do something over and over again for the last 30 years, even though we know it's not helping people mature? You know, so I would put a little bit of that responsibility back onto leaders. Like, so if you're listening and you lead people, you are responsible, right? Not for
Mm.
their outcome, but you are responsible for what you lay out. And
Yes.
so if you were to take time to ask the Lord, Father, I give you full permission to show me how to lead these people, right? Solomon
Mm.
at 14 is asking that question. I need your wisdom. Give me
Yeah.
wisdom to go in and amongst your people. I think if more leaders did that, the way we do church is going to change. It's going to become more interactive. There'll be more training, and it will directly result in the world changing.
Mm.
Mm.
Mm. Sure. That's powerful. I know that we've only got a few minutes left, so I really want you to touch on identity just for a
Yeah.
little bit. I know that we've been speaking, I mean, there's a thread of all of this, of identity in everything that we've spoken about. But in Sparrows and Lilies, I think that was most probably the biggest learning curve for me is,
Mm.
yes, the abundance aspect of it all, but the identity part of that teaching just completely blew me away. If you could
Yeah.
share a little bit more about our identity in Christ and how God sees us and expects us to live our purpose out of who we are. I mean, I
Mm.
often say Christianity is not something I do, it is who I am. You can't
Mm.
take that out of me because it is who I am.
Mm.
Um, how do we, I mean, I'll open up the floor to you just because I need to stop talking.
um, so I'm not sure if in Sparrows and Lilies I go into the prodigal son a little bit. Maybe I do. But when you look at the story of the prodigal son, we make it all about this one
A little
boy
bit.
who takes his inheritance and runs away.
Mm.
And the interesting thing in that story is actually that father's response to both his kids. And when you don't understand what your real inheritance is, which is actually
Mm.
your identity, you end up performing and you end up running after all the things that the world is selling you to feel like you belong. Today,
Mm.
everyone's wanting to belong because we were designed to belong, but we've been trained to perform to belong. So there are people doing crazy things just to be part of a group, to feel like, okay, someone wants me around. I remember when I came to New Zealand, I was 11 years old. You know, I'm still very Indian in my way, my hairstyle, the way I talk, all the stuff. And I faced a lot of racism, and I started to put on all these masks, and I started to pretend and become what I thought people wanted me to be so that I could belong, so that I would be
Mm.
accepted. And so I started to lose my identity. And for a period of 8, 9 years, like till I encountered God, I was just being whatever people wanted me to be so that they would like me. Right?
Mm.
That was my motive. And so when you don't know who you are, you will run around to try and
Yeah.
find an identity. And that's why in the world today, you have people that say, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer. When in reality, you're not a doctor, you're not a lawyer, you practice law, you practice medicine. That's not who you are. It's something that you do.
Mm.
It's the same in the church. I'm an apostle, I'm a prophet. No, you're not. You fulfill the role of an apostle, right? Paul himself in the Bible never calls himself Apostle Paul. You won't find that.
Mm.
He'll say, Paul, an apostle of the Lord Jesus. So he's
Mm.
very quick to separate
Mm.
identity from function, right?
Yeah.
But even in the church, we try and grab our function to determine identity. And so everyone is
Wow.
trying to pursue the hierarchy ladder so that they're doing something they think is important to then pretend to be important. But the
Mm.
kingdom bypasses all of that. In the
Mm.
kingdom, the least in the kingdom is greater than anyone else outside of it, right? Jesus is like, hey, children, come to me. He calls, unless you're like one of these little children, what do the children do? They just receive
Yeah.
freely. And that identity, when that is understood, you become bulletproof. So in that story, the boy takes the wealth, he goes, he spends it. Everyone knows that story. But when he comes back home, an interesting thing happens because the Bible says that the father saw him coming from afar off. Now, how did the father see him all that way? Could it be that every night the father was going out looking for when his son was going to come back?
Mm.
Because love believes the best, hopes the best. Love never ends, right? Could it be that the father was convinced at some point his son's going to come back and he was waiting for him? Now, if he was an Indian dad, right, and in some stories I go deeper into this, but if he was an Indian dad, he may want to correct his son a little bit, right? His son is about to get a bit of a reality check. And so when we think about that context, the whole town knew that, oh, look at this son. He embarrassed his father and he took all
Mm.
the money and he left. He brought shame to his family. The whole town, when the son was coming back, would have been like, Joseph's coming
Mm.
back. And some people would say, oh, maybe he's coming back to tell his dad that he's made a man of himself. But someone else might say he's going to get a hiding. And they're
Mm.
all watching and watching how dad's going to respond.
Yeah.
And most people think that God comes to slap you and then maybe welcome you back. But this story says the father runs to the son. Back in those days, showing your body was not something you do. It was an embarrassing thing, and showing skin. And so this father running with his kaftan, you can just almost imagine him pulling his kaftan up and running. And
Mm.
people's eyes now, instead of going on the shame of the son, fall onto the shame on the father's legs. Right?
Mm.
Suddenly, instead of going, oh, Joseph, shame on you, it becomes, what is this dad doing? And he
Yeah.
takes the shame off the son, puts it on himself. And the
Wow.
Bible says that he just goes and hugs him. No
Mm.
questions, no rebuke, no, why did you come back? Are you sorry? Did you repent? Hugs him, kisses him on the neck, and he restores his identity straight away. The robe, the ring, the sandals. This is who you really are, son. Your inheritance wasn't the money. It was who you are in my family. It was who you are in
Mm.
this world through my family. And what's
Mm.
interesting is then the son comes back home. There's a big party. He's throwing a party, and he's throwing a party for everybody. And the other son comes back. And this is where most Christians are, right? Most Christians are not the ones that spent all the money, come back, and they see God's goodness. Like a lot of people have those stories. I have that story. But maybe someone like you does not have that story. When I
Mm.
was in the youth ministry, a lot of the youth did not have that story. Some of them
Mm.
actually wished that they went and did dumb things so then they could come back to the Lord because they never understood true sonship. So this other son, he comes back home after working hard all day and he sees a party. And one of the servants says to him, oh, your brother's back. So master is throwing a party for your brother. And this son is filled with rage
Mm.
because now he's going, why would you throw a party for this guy? I am doing all the right things. I'm reading the Bible. I'm worshiping. I'm coming to church 2 hours early, setting up for worship practice. I'm leaving last. I'm closing the door. I'm serving with everything I got. You've never thrown me a party, and you're going to throw this guy a party? And it's really interesting that even in this example, the father, because the son won't come into the party, the father comes out to meet the son where he's at.
Mm.
And we see the heart of God, our Father, who will come and meet you where you're at when you
Mm.
tell the truth. See,
Mm.
finally, this son tells the truth. What's the truth? I'm working hard to earn something from you and you're giving me nothing. That was his truth the whole time.
Yeah.
But he never shared it with God. And I meet so many people, right? Like I get to minister now in churches and I see the pattern over and over again. I'm serving, I'm doing all the right things. Disappointment, discouragement, anger, but they don't voice it. They can't talk to God about it because their view of God is like, if I say it, he's going to kick me out of the family. And here
Mm.
is this son, he says it, and then the father responds with the most life-shattering statement. Son, everything I have was already yours.
Mm.
It's always been yours, which means you could have thrown a party anytime you wanted. But
Mm.
you chose to keep working and working and working and working for
And
something that I
doing.
already gave you.
Yes. Wow.
I already gave you. So a really good prayer there is, Father, I give you full permission to show me who I already am to you. Not
Wow.
who I'm going to become, not what I'm going to do, but who I already am to you. I give you full permission to show me that. And here is the
Mm.
key. After you pray that prayer, now I don't know what's about to go down in the next 48 hours of your life, but something will happen. And whatever happens, if you can let that become the beginning of your journey with God and you bring that process. So, for example, you might say, Father, I give you full permission, show me who I am. And suddenly you end up in an argument or a fight with a relative and you're completely thrown off course. And now, you're bitter or you're angry or whatever. In that moment, let God in. Right? A few hours later, someone may cut you off in traffic and you may unleash. Oh, in that moment, let God in. Someone may betray you in the next 2 days. You might lose some money in the next 2 days, whatever. But whatever the situation, just let God in. Bring him in there and go, Father, what's going on? And
Mm.
suddenly begins this journey of a father and a son, father and a child. And when that gets understood, man, you are unstoppable.
Sure.
Mhm.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, there is so much in there, and in everything that we've just spoken about that people can take and apply to your life today. I mean, the prayers alone. I mean, there's one that I've got stuck onto my wall here, which is, Father, I give you full permission to father me into my inheritance, because that's the
Yeah,
prayer
there
that
you
you
are.
do after the sparrows and lilies, and it's just being able to pray that, giving God full permission. I always used to say to God, don't be a gentleman in my life. Just
Yeah.
tell me like it is. Tell me what I need to do. Don't be kind and soft and gentle. Just be straight, because I will do it. But I think part of that is because I felt like I needed to do something, you know.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's such a big lesson. Um, Joseph, thank you so
Boom.
much. I don't want to take up much more of your time, but I do want you to tell people how they can get in touch with you, please. I'll share all of your website links and stuff, but
Yeah, just you find me on Facebook is the easiest way. You can private message me or email me, Joseph at iamjosephwilson.com. Simple. And yeah, that's how we can move together. If you want to move with me, yeah, easy.
great. Did you want to just share a bit about Royal Hybrids, or do you not have the time?
I do have to shoot because I have a coaching
Okay,
call that I'm a few
that's
minutes late
fine.
for. But yeah, I mean, if you can share that link, that would be
I
great.
will.
And I'm
Absolutely.
more than happy to get on conversations with people, right? So even though I do a coaching business, it's very relational. It's relational first.
Mm,
And so yeah, just jump on that link. And if you want to have a conversation with me, we can get on one and see if it's a good fit for you. Yeah.
great. All right. I'll
Awesome.
definitely share everything. Thank you so
Cool.
much. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate you, and I just want to honor you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward
Bye.
to more conversations.
Absolutely. I can't wait. Thanks. Bye. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining Joseph and I on the Embracing Grace podcast. He had to jump because he had another call, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here. I pray that you were touched and your heart was touched, and that your life will be changed by the message that he just shared. I just know that God has got such a beautiful plan and a purpose for you. And I want you to know that when you spend time in the Word, when you spend time in intimacy with God, He's going to share so much of what is on His heart for you. I mean, in Psalm 139, verse 16, and I share about this all the time, God speaks about how He ordained your days before you even knew, and how He wrote about you in His book. Um, And that was before your days even started. So before you were even thought of, God had a plan and a purpose for you. So there is so much that you can learn just from this message that Joseph just shared, but also so much about your identity of who you were created to be. And like Joseph was sharing, is who we are is already inside of us. It's not something we have to earn or to do. We don't have to beg God for it. It's already inside of us. So when you spend time with God and pray the prayers that I mean, I encourage you to pray the prayers that he shared. Be bold and just allow God to infiltrate your heart and infiltrate your entire being so that you can live out who God made you to be. I just want to thank you for being here again. And yes, please go and follow Joseph on Facebook. You will find him on YouTube as well. Just you can just look up I am Joseph Wilson, and I'll share all the links for you in the show notes. But if you've got any questions, please reach out to me. I'll share my details in the show notes as well. But I pray that God will bless you and will take you to new heights in his love for you. Thanks so much for joining the Embracing Grace podcast, and I will see you again soon. Lots of love. Bye.